Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, True Crime and Felines. My name is Randy, and every Friday I bring you a true crime case or mystery with one or more of my fabulous felines. Ghost is sitting right in front of the camera, so you're going to see his ears and face very close up. The others are joining as well. So this week's case, we are going back to Westfield, New Jersey. I say going back because we already did a video around the Watcher. This case happened in Westfield, New Jersey as well. It is regarding John List, who actually took out his entire family very brutally and then fled and started a whole new life under an assumed name. So let's get started. John Emil List was born September 17th, 1925 in Michigan. He was the only child of his parents, John and Alma. Now, he had a pretty normal childhood, except that he had a very stringent religious upbringing. John's father was an authoritarian, and his teachings, beside the religion, were that the man of the house protected and cared for his family. Anything less would be considered a failure and bring shame to the family. Alma, who doted on her son, took a dominant role in his life even when he was an adult. So in 1943, he enlisted in the U.S. Army, and he served as a laboratory technician in World War II. After the war, he went to college and he got his bachelor's degree in business administration and his master's degree in accounting. In 1950, during the Korean War, he was asked to come back to active duty, and he was placed in Virginia while he was there. Now, while he was there, that's where he met Helen Taylor. Now, Helen was a widow. Her husband had died in the Korean War, and she had one daughter named Brenda. She lived close by, and her and John started dating. John and Helen were married December 1951 in Maryland, just 3 short months after they were dating. Now, John would later say that he was tricked into the marriage because Helen faked a pregnancy to trap him. John stated Helen was very verbally and physically abusive to him and drank a lot. Regardless, though, they made the marriage work for the next 20 years. And by 1952, John and Helen had 3 kids of their own: Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. Now, after John got out of college and after his second service was over, he had a number of jobs, and they didn't last very long. He always seemed to be wanting to get on to the better job, better money. John continued to be a devout Lutheran like his parents, and he became a Sunday school teacher. He continued this very stringent religious upbringing with his own family, and some people would even call him a religious zealot. Now, by 1960, Brenda, who was Helen's first daughter from her first marriage, had grown up, became an adult, got married, and moved out of the house. Helen, who was already an alcoholic from when her first husband died, she began drinking on the reg and became increasingly unstable. John saw this activity as, leading down the wrong path, that it was unholy and against their religion, and it caused tension between the couple. John even stated that Helen would berate him and say that if he was half a man that her first husband was, they wouldn't be in the situations they were in or having the troubles they were having. And by that, she meant both kind of financial and their private sex life. This would just further push John to do what his father taught him and take care of his family. He was very intelligent and he was very good at numbers and accounting. And he ended up finally landing a job with a bank in New Jersey as the vice president. He now had a very high income, and their financial troubles seemed to be completely done. He even ended up moving his family to Westfield, New Jersey in a 19-room Victorian mansion called Breeze Knoll. It had marble fireplaces, an elegant ballroom, and even had a Tiffany's skylight in the ballroom. John's mother, Alma, would move into the mansion as well, and she had her own living quarters up in the attic. Now, don't see this as a room. The attic was huge. It had its own bathroom, kitchen, everything. John, of course, joined the local Lutheran church and continued being a Sunday school teacher as well. Years went by, and the community saw a perfect man with a perfect family. Now, in 1971, the bank that John worked for ended up laying him off. The problem with John is he didn't have much social skills. He had a rigid personality, and his extreme religious beliefs made him hard to work with. Truth be told, all the jobs that John lost in the past were because of these issues. He was very competent in his job. He was very good at numbers. He was very good at the business aspect, but he was just unlikable. So John was very embarrassed about losing his job and why he lost it. So he kept it a secret and he hid it from his family. He would still get dressed every morning, just like he was going to work, and would go through the motions, but he would usually end up at the train station. And he would just read all day, nap, and just fret about what he was supposed to do. Now, he did go on a few job interviews, but he either didn't get the job or it wasn't enough money to keep their lifestyle afloat. Remember, John was taught from a young age that you're either a success or you're a failure. There is no in between. So if it wasn't the best job, he wasn't going to take it. Out of desperation and to continue to hide what was going on, John started skimming money from his mother's bank account in order to keep up with the mortgage on Breeze Knoll. He also encouraged his children to get part-time jobs in order to teach them maturity and responsibility, is what he told them. But honestly, he made them put most, if not all, their money back into the household finances. As the year progressed, the money was running out very quickly. And in the late fall, they actually started foreclosure process on Breeze Knoll. Now, John was very stressed and was worried constantly, and he tried to hide it at home, but the family started to notice. Patricia, his oldest daughter, confided in her drama coach that she was worried about her father and she was afraid he would just snap. Helen began to drink more. She became addicted to tranquilizers, and psychologically, she was getting worse. She also began to decline physically as well. She started to go blind. Now, this is about the time that John found out that his wife Helen had been hiding a secret from him for years. She had syphilis. She had actually suffered from the disease since 1940. She got it from her first husband. Now, because syphilis isn't infectious in its later stages, John nor the children were affected by this. However, to find out his wife had a venereal disease was considered very frowned upon in the religious community, and it was just another embarrassment that he was worried about. It was later determined that John suffered from obsessive compulsive personality disorder, or OCPD. So he only saw two ways out of the situation: that he could kill his entire family and send their souls to heaven, or he could go on welfare. Apparently, welfare was not an option due to his father's teachings and how he was brought up. He saw himself as a failure to take care and protect his family, so he decided to kill them so they would still go to heaven. Now, it's important to know the difference between obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder, OCPD. Those with OCPD, like John, they see no issue with their behavior. They see that it's everybody else's behavior that's the problem. And those with OCD, they know their behavior's a problem, they just can't help it. I'm not making excuses for John. I'm just trying to get you into his mindset. Now, what he did was not right. In his mind, he didn't see it that way. And also, having OCPD does not make you a murderer either. So don't come at me for that. Let me make that clear. I'm just trying to explain his mindset at the time. So John decided his only option was to, of course, kill his family. John would tell Connie Chung in 2002 that a couple days before he put his plan into effect, he even asked his family how they'd like their remains handled in case of their death. How morbid is that? So on November 9th, 1971, John decided that was the day. He used a 9mm semi-automatic rifle and his father's Colt 22 revolver. His children got up as they always did, and they went to school. Helen, John's wife, came down the stairs, made herself a cup of coffee, and was enjoying it at the kitchen table. John walked up behind Ellen and shot her in the back of the head. He then went to the attic where his mother was having breakfast. He kissed her on the forehead and then shot her above the left eye. He then had lunch because he was hungry. Apparently, killing makes you hungry. After that, he drove to the bank and he closed both his and his mother's accounts, and he cashed out all of his mother's saving bonds. When Patricia, who was 16, and Frederick, who was 13, arrived home from school, John shot them both in the back of the head as they walked through the door. John then only had one family member left, and that was his favorite son, John Jr., who was 15. John was still at school because he had a soccer game. So John drove to the school and watched his son play soccer. After the soccer game, he then drove his son home. As they walked into the house, he ended up shooting John Jr. 10 times. As John would state, quote, "I don't know whether it was only because he was still jerking that I wanted to make sure that he didn't suffer, or that it was sort of a way of relieving tension after having completed what I felt was my assignment for the day." How cold can you get? John would then take all of the bodies and place them in the ballroom and put them in sleeping bags except for his mother. He said he left his mother in the attic because she was too heavy to move. John then went to the desk in his study and he wrote letters to the school and to the part-time jobs that his kids had, saying that they were going on an extended vacation down to North Carolina to visit their ailing maternal grandmother. John then wrote a 5-page letter to his local pastor, pretty much confessing the murders. John then stopped all milk, newspaper, and mail deliveries. John went around the house and cleaned up the various crime scenes and blood where his family members were killed. He then went around and he removed himself from any family photograph that he could find, so it would be hard to find a photograph of him for, searching purposes. He then turned down the thermostat in the house. He turned on all the lights in the house, turned the radio to a religious station, and it played throughout the intercom system in the house, and cranked up the volume, and then disappeared. It would be about a month later before the family's bodies were discovered. On December 7th, the light bulbs in the house started kind of burning out one by one. And the neighbors thought this was odd and they hadn't seen a lot of activity in the house, so they ended up calling the police. The police looked around the property, but they only could look around the outside because the doors were locked. And they didn't see anything suspicious, so they figured the family was on that extended vacation that John stated they were taking and was still down there for some reason. So they just went ahead and left. However, that night, Patricia's drama coach became very suspicious and very concerned that he hadn't heard from Patricia at all, that even on this extended vacation, she would at least be calling and telling him when she was coming back. So he ended up going to the house and started yelling Patricia's name by the front door. This, of course, got the neighbors' attention, and the cops were called again. This time when the cops come out, the drama coach explained his suspicion, and they found a unlocked window that led to the basement. He was able to finally convince the cops to please go in and see if everything was fine inside of the house. So they did. The minute they made their way up the stairs, a horrible stench hit them and they knew something was wrong. That's when they found the bodies in the ballroom. So the investigation into these killings began immediately, of course, and they searched the rest of the house. That is when they found John's mother in the attic and found John's note to his pastor on his desk in his study. In the letter to the pastor, John stated his family was falling apart. He said his wife refused to even attend church with him anymore. His daughter Patricia wanted to become an actress in Hollywood, and he considered that the most evil of occupations. He was deeply in debt, and instead of his family being embarrassed by his failings of a father, which could turn them away from their faith, he decided that he needed to kill them so to ensure their place in heaven. He ended the letter with, quote, "At least I'm certain that all have gone to heaven now. If things had gone on, who knows if that would be the case," unquote. So a nationwide manhunt was started for Mr. John List, and the case, of course, made national news. Now, the police hit several dead ends, and there were issues with the investigation from the start and throughout the years. For one, all reliable photographs of John was gone. So he destroyed them. So it was really hard to get a picture of John. Secondly, authorities found John's car at the JFK airport in New York, but there was no evidence that he ever boarded a plane. So after a while, the trail went cold. In May of 1989, America's Most Wanted was on television and aired their oldest case to date, which was John List. This was now an 18-year-old crime at this time. The segment featured an age-progressed bust of John, and it was pretty spot on. The bust was made by Frank Bender, and he was a forensic artist. He was really good at his job. Bender actually consulted with a forensic psychologist as well and used family photographs to predict how he would age. The key here was that Bender put on glasses on the bust because he stated John would use glasses to disguise himself and make him look better than he was or more important than he was. And the glasses on the bust that Frank Bender put on were the same exact style glasses that John was wearing when he was arrested. Like, wow, great job. So the segment airs, and an old neighbor of John's recognized the bust. But he stated that his old neighbor, that the neighbor that he recognized, his name wasn't John List, his name was Bob Clark. But he ended up calling authorities anyway. Less than 2 weeks later, John was arrested in Richmond, Virginia at his job at an H&R Block accounting firm. So the story that John told authorities is that after the murders in 1971, when he disappeared, he drove his car to the JFK airport to throw authorities off. He then caught a bus back to New Jersey. He ended up traveling by train from New Jersey to Michigan, and then eventually would travel to Colorado. He settled in Denver in 1972 and took a local accounting job. He went under the name Robert Bob Clark, which ended up being one of his college classmates who also went into accounting, so he figured he could hide under that. After that accounting job that he got in Denver, he then got another job. So from 1979 to 1986, he was the controller at a paper box manufacturer outside of Denver. He, of course, joined the local Lutheran church and even ran the carpool for shut-in church members and would help them go get groceries and everything like that. Now, through this church, he met a woman named Dolores Miller. They hit it off and were married in 1985. In 1988, the couple had moved to Virginia when John, using his name as Bob Clark, got a job at H&R Block as an accountant, where he was finally caught in 1989. So John's trial started in April 1990, and they did convict him of 5 counts of first-degree murder. He denied direct responsibility for his actions, stating, quote, "I feel that because of my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened. I ask all affected by this for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer," unquote. The judge, not convinced, would tell the court, quote, "John Emil List is without remorse and without honor. After 18 years, 5 months, and 22 days, it is now time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John Jr. to rise from the grave," unquote. The judge ended up imposing 5 terms of life imprisonment to be conserved consecutively, the maximum sentence allowed at that time. Now, John did file an appeal, and his grounds were that his judgment was impaired due to his post-traumatic stress disorder from serving in the military. He also stated that the 5-page letter he left for his pastor, the confession letter, was a confidential communication between him and his local clergyman, so it should not be allowed into evidence at all. The Federal Court of Appeals rejected both of these arguments. John's second wife, who she thought she was married to Bob Clark, but she stood by John for a while until the evidence became overwhelmingly undeniable, and she divorced him in 1989, right before his trial. So John was interviewed, like I mentioned before, by Connie Chung in 2002. This would be the only time that John expressed any type of remorse by stating, quote, "I wish I had never done what I did. I've regretted my action and prayed for forgiveness ever since." Now, who knows if this was just a put on for the interview or not? That's what I think anyway, because he never showed any type of remorse before that. And even as he was talking to a psychiatrist during his trial, before and during his trial, the psychiatrist even said he has no remorse. He's not even capable of remorse, he doesn't think, because of his OCPD and probably a little sociopath in there. Now, Connie Chung did ask John, you did all this, so why didn't you take your own life then, if this was, your plan? John stated that he didn't believe in suicide because suicide was the ultimate sin, and if he committed suicide, he wouldn't be reunited with his family up in heaven, eventually. John also mentioned that when the America's Most Wanted episode aired, that him and his wife were watching TV and they were just flipping through the channels, and they caught the tail end of the segment, and that was where they kept showing the age progression bust of John, which of course looked just like him. He said he was sweating bullets, but that when he would look over at his wife, she seemed to either be disinterested in the show, or that she wasn't really paying attention, or she didn't even recognize or made the connections. So he figured he was in the clear, at least with his wife. So John went to prison, and in March of 2008, at the age of 82, he passed away of complications with pneumonia. The mansion in Westfield, New Jersey, Breeze Knoll, remained empty until it was destroyed by a fire in August 1972, 9 months after the murders took place. The fire was ruled arson, but it's still an unsolved case and nobody knew who did it. The ironic part is that this mansion had this fancy ballroom with this really fancy skylight that was rumored to be a Tiffany's original. So back in 1972, this would have been worth $100,000. Ironically, John could have probably tried to sell that or something and get $100,000 to, help his financial situation, but it either never crossed his mind, or he figured he couldn't get away with it. A new house ended up being built on the site in 1974. So what are your thoughts on this case? Can you imagine watching America's Most Wanted and the stories about you and how you're most wanted and you're sitting there watching your spouse do you recognize me? and just praying they don't find any similarities to anything. I can't imagine. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments down below. Please don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell so you know when new cases come up, and I will be back next Friday with a new true crime case or mystery. Thanks, guys.